The reason why we're addressing it is because this is an issue of spiritual formation, because people's political formation is getting in the way of them hearing the words of Jesus and being able to actually do it in their churches and in their spiritual spaces. And that's why we're addressing it. And that's why we have to address the specifics of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah. And we're here because the church has aligned itself with political forces and persuasions and powers that have suited its own agenda. Welcome to Hopeful Exiles. If you're deconstructing, reconstructing, hurt or whole, a person of faith, or just trying to be a better human, welcome to an authentic community at the intersection of culture and Christianity. We are your guides, Matt and Ryan. Hey Ryan, how you doing today?
I'm great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and we are ready to get into our topic today. And let's just face it, let's be honest, it's a heavy one.
It's a very heavy one.
It's been talked about for quite some time in the news. What a way to get us started in with the Hopeful Exiles, but these are the waters in which we realize that we swim in. Today we're going to talk about really the idea of, we want to spend a lot of our time focused on politics and the integration of, or how politics and faith continue to run into each other. We talk about that intersection in that first episode, right? So the intersection, there's a major collision happening right now. And specifically, it has come to a head with the tragic murder of Charlie Kirk, who is a conservative, also known as an evangelical Christian, and was really involved in the political space. So we're going to address that today on the pod.
Yeah. And again, imperfect people trying to address the evils of the world, the weird dark spaces of the world with some level of nuance. I know that this is not a time in culture where you can have nuance, and also that's just what we're going to do. And so again, before we start, our heart is to help people process, is to make things clear, is to anchor things in God's heart, but also that requires truth and clarity. We will always do this with a measure of mercy and grace, and just try to figure it out as we go.
Yeah, that's right. And again, just to be clear, this is any other situation which we've experienced a lot, even this year, of gun violence. We all recognize that there is a significant problem. We all recognize that it is tragic, and we all feel a level of this should be preventable. There's also, most importantly, it's the injustice that is done, not just to the individual and the victim's families, but it's an injustice to all of us because we are interconnected. We are human beings. And when we see someone assassinated or murdered in any fashion whatsoever, in any way, it's horrifying. And so we recognize that as this is evil and it is an injustice, regardless of the motivations behind it.
Well, it's terrorism is what it is. It's the sort of fun anytime that you're escalating from the exchange of thoughts, concepts, and ideas to don't like your ideas, so I'm going to murder you. You lose. You just do. I think our certain ideas disgusting or odious? Yeah, they're nasty and hate, whatever. Sure. To me, I'm like, there's never a win. There's only escalation. There's only another, like right now, there's so many calls for retribution and revenge on people who had nothing to do with this. And I think that's just what violence does. It just creates more violence. And so I have not watched, I'm not the sort of person, I do not want to watch someone get shot. I've only seen videos of like the aftermath of people, fleeing the scene. I do not recommend, at least personally, I'm like, I just don't recommend. I don't know what I would gain or what people gain from seeing that sort of stuff. I think it's disturbing. So I haven't seen it. I've heard it's horrific it's tragic, and it's terrorism. And what it does is it creates a level of unsafety for anybody that wants to engage in public debate around ideas. And it's very, like, as for what what we're trying to do, it's terrifying. It's like, oh man, like, just the reality that like not everyone has a Secret Service detail. Like if you want to engage in a public space, like it adds that separate thing. But for Charlie Kirk's family, my heart was very heavy. His wife and his kids, for the people that knew him and loved him, obviously no one should be killed for trying to engage in debate. And that's a loss. That's a public, that is a loss for the democracy. That's a loss for civil debate. It's deeply disturbing. And it speaks to the rot at the center of so many of the institutions of our country, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's this issue alone, and maybe for some people who are tuning into this podcast and maybe didn't have a big awareness of who Charlie Kirk was, enough has been said now about him. You've probably been at least exposed in regards to where he stood on various issues, how involved he was in conservative right-wing politics, how close he was to the president of the United States and the vice president, and really how him and his organization, Turning Point USA, delivered um, a resounding victory amongst young people, especially young men. And he was highly influential in that and in the political moment going into 2024, and even well before that. So he was a young activist and whose life was tragically cut short. And so, but this is actually the reason why this is such a conversation now, because it's been a conversation that a lot of churches have either willfully engaged in or have avoided. And if they've engaged, they usually pick a side in a persuasion. And if they've disengaged, they've done a disservice to what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And what we're talking about is politics and really the way of Jesus. And so these two things, they of course are going to intersect. This is that intersection we talk about. The intersection of culture and Christianity, the intersection of society. How do we live as people of faith and of the book? And also, how do we live in a social world that really requires us to engage in the politic, in the issues of the day,
Right.
and do so according to Jesus? And so we realize probably for many people in this audience, you have probably been driven away from churches for this reason. You have been hurt by churches for this reason. You have decided that you don't affiliate with that church, with a particular church or branding of church and their direction and their support of a particular political movement because your political and social ideals might be separate than what the church has been teaching. And we realize and we see you, and this is where we want this space to be. So for those listening, we're not actually trying to even persuade you differently to think to come from one side to the other. We actually are looking for the narrow road, the narrow gate that Jesus often spoke about or had spoken about in a parable. And that is, we're trying to find the way to life. And we see a lot of broad gates right now and a lot of people marching down their way to destruction in the context of the church. And we want to be that space. We want to be that authentic, quiet, and humble community that really pursues the ways of Jesus. And so that's where this conversation is coming from. That's our hearts on this.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said. I think this conversation is really difficult to have because right now, people that really, really love Charlie Kirk, like anybody who supported his views politically, are rightfully grieving because he was assassinated. And then also because Charlie Kirk is so emblematic of some of the systemic issues that you and I want to address in this podcast, in this community, there's a need to address the things that he said. And right now there are a lot of people who are like, don't go there. And it's like, hey, Charlie Kirk would want us to go there. Like, he was all about the First Amendment and vigorous, even contentious debate. We don't want to have a contentious debate. That is not our heart. But like, there is a need to address. He stood for a lot of the things that that many of us look at and are like, man, I don't know if I like the way that there's this marriage between the evangelical church and politics. I'll tell you, as a person of color, there are very few things that Charlie Kirk said that I agree with, that I think are good, that I think should be championed by people of faith, and we'll get into some of those shortly here. I want to be very clear that this in no way, like, we're still condemning any sort of violence, and but there's a need for. Let me tell you, this is coming from someone. I was literally fired from my last church because I delivered a sermon on politics. And so many of the times afterwards when I'm talking to people, they're like, why would you talk about politics in an election year in a country as divided as our country? And my thing is always, I am a disciple maker. I am all about the way of Jesus. And Jesus told us to make disciples. And when people's political formation gets in the way of their kingdom discipleship, it becomes an issue of discipleship. Everything I addressed from stage that day was to help people recognize that their kingdom identity, that their kingdom citizenship goes first and foremost. And then much, much further down the line is their earthly affiliations. Democrat, Republican, whatever, you know? And so to me, watching the way that this is playing out is an issue of discipleship. It is an issue
Yeah.
of like, who are we at our core? And I'll tell you, like, the thing that the core of the sermon that I preached a year ago at this point was a kingdom of God political ethic is centered in radical love of neighbor,
Yeah.
radical love of neighbor. Like Jesus's command was love your neighbor. It's not a suggestion. Love your neighbor. Not if I agree with my neighbor, I should love them. If my neighbor and I vibe, I should love them. No, love your neighbor. It's a
It,
command.
and
So
Ryan, it,
yeah,
it, it go, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's another level. It's not just love
yeah.
your neighbor, it's love your enemy. Love
Yes.
the opponent. Love
Yes.
the person that you terribly, awfully disagree with.
Yes.
Love the person who says the most hateful and spiteful thing about you or to you. Love them.
And I want to say, again, I'm not perfect at this. I've had a lot of practice in the last year. I was literally canceled for trying to preach the truth of the scriptures to people who said they wanted to hear the truth of the scriptures. So like, again, I'm not saying this as somebody who's like this has come at great personal cost to me, to my livelihood, to my family. I have had an extensive amount. I've done a lot of counseling in the last year. I've done a lot of lamenting, a lot of grieving. So I'm not saying this as someone who like, there is skin in the game. This is still really difficult for me. I'm still figuring out what this means. I still sometimes I'm like, love, but Lord, those people were aggressively against me. And still the command is the same. Hey, I have loved you. Love your enemy. And so I think that's where this comes down to. The reason why we're addressing it is because this is an issue of spiritual formation, because people's political formation is getting in the way of them hearing the words of Jesus and being able to actually do it in their churches and in their spiritual spaces. And that's why we're addressing it. And that's why we have to address the specifics of Charlie Kirk.
Yeah. And we're here because of a failure to to preach that message.
Yeah.
We're here because of the church has aligned itself with political forces and persuasions and powers that have suited its own agenda or suited the thing that it sought to achieve in the moment. And that's why we're here. This is why this is such a big deal to us right now. And for many who are Christians who are trying to navigate the future moving forward, and why it feels difficult to have this conversation. We can grieve and mourn
Yes.
and lament together, but we realize that lamenting is like, it almost feels like you walk into to a funeral and in like a really broken marriage or relationship or family, and we'll just say broken family. And like the one, and because of the brokenness, whether it be through divorce or whatever it might be, one side of the family is standing on one side, like literally on the one side of the wall, and the other side's on the other side of the wall, right? And so it's like we're here for one reason, but we're not talking. There's no justice in this. There's no justice in murder. There's no justice in retribution. It's not the ways of Jesus. And most importantly, justice is the wholeness. It is the fulfillment of righteousness. It ensures that the wrongs are made right again, because we actually will say, as a people, as a community, as a society, this, not just the motivation behind this, but this type of event, this categorically, we will amend for and will not happen again. And these are the conversations that we as a society have a hard time having, because we're still talking about it. And because we still we're still wrestling with racism and segregation, because the country failed at reconciliation work. It failed at rebuilding after the Civil War. I mean, it's like there's so much here that we have not addressed and achieved true justice. We just find justice because the law is written. But, in the scripture, it says, it's not just about the letter of the law, it is the spirit of the law. There's a greater law, and that's the one we've already been talking about, and that's the way of love.
Yeah. I will say, as a person of color, the reactions last week, I actually was a little surprised by, honestly. Not in the sense that like people were mourning and grieving, because they should be mourning and grieving, but it was like, this country has never been based on violence or political violence. I'm like, the United States of America? First of all,
what are you talking about?
I'm like, listen, and again, I love this country, proud to be an American, rah, rah, rah. This country was founded on political violence. When the European settlers came to this country and wiped out the Native Americans, you want to talk about like political violence? I mean, think about what happened to almost every major Black civil rights leader during the civil rights movement. They were systematically hunted down and murdered by our own government in some cases, which is kind of crazy. And so all that to say, I think I was a little bit surprised when people were saying things like that, because I'm like, literally in the last few months, we had two senators, or two Democratic politicians from, or sorry, one Democratic politician in Minnesota, I think it was, wherever
Yeah.
Tim Walz is from,
Yeah.
Melissa Hortman, who was gunned down by a right wing, far right wing assassin, essentially. And he had an entire list of like Democratic politicians that he was going to murder. He just got stopped before he could get to them. And someone else was attacked and stuff like that, but like literally murdered in their own home. And I'm like, that happened months ago. And there was a shooting. There was a shooting the day of Charlie Kirk's assassination, in the same
In Colorado on a high school campus.
Colorado, in the same place, in the same area that Columbine happened. And you know, to me, I think I was a little bit surprised by the like, this doesn't happen in our country. I'm like, no, but it does. It
Yeah.
really does. And if we do not take a hard look at the ways that we allow violence, or the ways that certain violence does not register on our radars, and I know
To,
that
to
like
the,
violence is
to that
always
point.
shocking.
Yeah. Well, to that point, I mean, again, like you say certain violence, right? So of
Yes.
course we're talking about gun violence. We're talking about people who have died and been murdered through a particular, like a firearm. But
Mhm.
what about, I mean, even just going back to January 6th of
Yes.
2021 and what happened in Capitol Hill, like that
There was
was
a
also
gallows
violent.
set up
Yeah, there were
for Mike
gallows set
Pence.
up. There was violence. There was officers who were brutally beaten. There were multiple deaths resulting from that event.
Mhm.
And so like and it's all caught on camera. It's all caught on video. It's
Right.
horrific
Right.
what it took place. And it's violence against the state. It's violence against buildings and institutions. So these are all things that are actually, they're interconnected and they're political in nature. And so we keep running up against this, and by saying this, actually, you're exactly right. This stuff does actually happen in our society. We
It's
don't like to
endemic
talk.
to the society.
It is.
Yeah.
Timothy McVeigh, even. I mean, go back to the Oklahoma City bombing.
Mhm.
I remember that as a child. Like,
Yeah.
again, political in nature, extremist, but there is, the algorithms are feeding it. I'm not going to blame everything on social media. That would be ignorant of me, but
Sure.
and also is just not true. But let's just call it for what it is, and that is, there really is those algorithms, that how social media functions and thrives and makes money off of us is through extremist ideas. I
Yes.
heard a new term, by the way, this recently that I didn't know existed. Ryan, have you heard of this? A rage entrepreneur?
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying. I know
In
exactly. I've never heard of that, but I know exactly what you're going to say. Go.
Yeah, the rage entrepreneur is the person or individual that actually incites and feeds off of the anxieties and fears of society, and then creates additional anger and retribution towards particular issues in society, right? For the particular gain of profit and specifically political organizing. This term
Wow.
was coined back in the early 2000s.
Mm,
By some German philosopher. I just
yeah.
read up on it. I'm like, rage entrepreneur? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Like, yeah, like, I mean, it's a misnomer, but still, like, the idea of it being like, that's a thing.
Well, I
And
mean, the entire model of social media these days, and to be fair, there is some level of hypocrisy of like, we're trying to reach people through social media. So we recognize, we get it, like we
we're
see.
not going to incite the rage, though. We're not going to
We're
feed
not.
on
No.
your fears. We
No.
actually want
Absolutely
to,
not.
we want to address, we're actually hoping to provide real solutions, and we're addressing the fear with
Yeah.
real hope and solutions.
And real connection.
And real
And real
connection.
connection.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, the algorithm is it's made to create engagement and to foster engagement. And what they found was, you don't get a ton of, you can get some engagement by making people feel happy or feel good. The way that you can guarantee engagement, put something that enrages someone, put something that makes them angry. And it's the reason why the algorithm, it's made to maximize engagement, and anger, rage, fear, anxiety maximizes engagement. And it's one of the reasons why, again, one of the things that we're trying to do is like, someone said to me recently, they were like, man, I've never seen someone's mind change over social media. I was like, Oh, I have.
Mm,
I've seen a number of times actually.
yeah.
But again, it is a narrow way. It is a way of like, I am not trying to win the argument. I want to win you as a person because you matter to me more than this ideological point.
Yeah.
Like if I win the argument and I lose my neighbor, I lost. That full stop. That's it. And again, for us, the thing is, we know we're not going to reach everyone. That's not what we're trying to do. What we want to do is build something actually centered in hope and actually centered in the goodness of God and actually believing the best about our neighbor, even if we vehemently disagree with our neighbor. Like one of the things that I found very heartening in this stuff, and we're going to get into some specifics in a second here, but one of the things I found really heartening was that a bunch of people that Charlie Kirk had debated who were on the far left and progressives and all kinds of stuff, I heard a number of them saying things like, look, I found his views to be abhorrent, but he was very kind. He introduced me to his family. He introduced me to his kids. And, we had very good conversation before the debate. Now during the debate, we went at it and it was wild and all kinds of stuff, but they were like, he was actually a kind person. And to me, I'm like, that's what we're trying to lean into of is the like, now again, we're going to oppose views that we think are, diminish the imago Dei, the image of God that God imprinted on every single human being. Like we are going to vehemently oppose any sort of views that tear down the dignity of other people, that try to restrict their autonomy, that whatever. We're going to do that. But also like our neighbor is not the enemy. Our neighbor is the way out. And it's incredibly
Yeah.
disheartening to me that so much of what we see, how we engage is, well, your neighbor is an existential threat. And then wonder why there is violence
Wonder why we
because
can't trust each other.
we have turned our hearts away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's in yeah. Your neighbor's not the enemy, they're the way out. I love that. And I would even just like say like so much in all of this, there's we create these arguments and these fictional battles between us and them. We categorically create tribes of us against them. And whoever
Yes.
them are, it's always shifting, it's ill-defined, use broad terms to address complex people. It's unjust, it's unfair, it's not even human and logically sound. And instead, we would be better off if we began to move beyond us and them arguments and we began to find our community and we look at the world as all of us.
Yes.
It's not us, it's not them, it's we. It's together.
Yes.
Listen, we are either going to inhabit this world together or we're not, right? And we can pretend or we can think that others want our eternal destruction. And that might be true. There may be groups, there may be nations out there who want that. But I think really at the core of all humanity, we're all just trying to find a way to
Right.
make it work. And we
Right.
see that the unjust systems continue to oppress and create further tension and frustration among large groups of people and societies that cause reaction. And until we begin to move towards a place of belonging and inclusion and embracing the other, we are heading towards self-destruction. There's no way to dice that. I mean, that's the trajectory we're on. And I would call upon my Christian friends, my fellow Christian pastors, and I would call upon you. And if you feel wronged in this moment, then I call upon you to say, I will not engage in the acts of retribution. I will choose the way of life and the way of love as my response, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, which you have a right to be angry and hurt and frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
You have a complete right to feel that.
Yeah.
We feel it too.
Yeah.
But you must pave the way. It's the one who's been wronged that has the greatest opportunity to show the way forward of righteousness and goodness and justice.
Yeah. Which
It's
is
on you
difficult.
now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's
It's
where
not
we're
on
coming
them.
from.
It's not on anyone else. It's on you. It's
Yeah.
on us.
Yeah, it's the reason why we started the hopeful exile. It's like I literally got kicked out of the last space I was in, and I also am like I actually really hope I hope for their sake, the people that were involved with some of that stuff, that the Lord is merciful to them, kind to them, that He is near to them. Because I'm like when a mentor of mine asked me, he's like, when are you the most willing to change direction or to repent or to and I was like, oh, usually when I'm connecting with God. And he's like, yeah, pray that your quote unquote enemies would experience God's nearness. And that really shifted, I think, it really helped me move forward, because it's like there is a vengeful part of me that's like, I hope they whatever, whatever, whatever. And then it's also like, I actually believe that there was so much good in those people. The reason why I was so hurt from that situation was because I knew how much goodness there was. I knew the capacity of these people to protect others and to love them well. And so what happened to me was so disheartening. And so I'm not going to gloss over that. I'm going to acknowledge that. And I cannot absolve this person of that. Like, that's something that they have to answer for. But also, I do hope they figure it out. I do hope they repent. I do hope they change direction. I do hope that they become an administrator of justice within their spaces, that they call people to a better discipleship, a deeper anchoring in God's heart that's not just reactionary, but is truly based in the truth of the scriptures, which apparently people say they want. But oftentimes when the scriptures differ from what you were told they were, when God's heart for people is different from what you were indoctrinated to think it's hard. There is a dissonance there. And so anyway, I still have to say, we are really, like, this is our project, and you're not giving that challenge to people to pave the way because you're like, oh yeah, like, be better. It's like, hey, no, this is what we are doing right now.
Yeah.
This is the work that we're engaged in.
Yeah, you can't wait for somebody else to build it. We're taking action and wanting to do it. And so for you as a listener, we're glad that you're with us. Ryan, we kept teasing this and we're already kind of well into this episode now, but why, like, imagine just kind of help, like, I'm just going to pretend like I'm just sitting in the shoes of somebody who was a very devout follower of Charlie Kirk.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm listening and I'm feeling I'm hearing us talk, but maybe give that person a reason. Like we've said, how could you disagree with him? He talked about Jesus. He goes to a church on a regular basis. He would quote scripture, and he often upheld a lot of maybe some of my own values.
Mm-hmm.
What was so wrong about the things in which maybe he said or would have been so problematic for other people, including Christians?
Yeah. This also speaks to the larger divide that's happening between, like, in the evangelical church and its marriage to the political right. These are some of the larger issues. What happens a lot of times is that it's not that the person's completely 100% wrong. Like, maybe they do love Jesus. They do have, they are a good father. They're a good husband. They love their spouse. Like, I think specifically growing up within the evangelical church, you're made to root for anybody that would boldly proclaim the name of Jesus. So you see that and you're like, oh my gosh, boldness. And so that kind of becomes like your guy, and you're all in on them because, like, how many people do you have in the space that are doing that? The problem was, and again, with all due respect, Charlie had some pretty vile and abhorrent views about other people that were not his in group, that were very, very concerning and honestly just super hurtful, and helped create and he helped normalize positions that tore down the dignity of other people. So, like, he's on record saying things like, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to wonder, is he qualified to fly the plane? Which is, like, again, what he's talking about is the DEI affirmative action kind of thing of, like, when I've talked to a lot of white conservatives, and I'm going to I want to put my bias on the table here. I get really irritated by these conversations, but they're good conversations to have, because a lot of times they're not because someone's evil and mean. They just don't know. So I'll talk to white conservatives a lot, and they'll say things like, well, I don't want someone working, in a space that didn't earn their way there. And it's like, anybody that got into a space from affirmative action, it's not about you're unqualified, but here's a job anyway. It's you're qualified, but you haven't been allowed into the spaces. You're not even considered when it comes time to get a job. It's not about
You were turned away at the front door.
Right. Yeah. No one's trying to tear down the meritocracy in that sense, right? Like, what we're trying to say is, like, okay, let's just say that in this country, because of the systemic structures of, like, okay, access to wealth, access to capital, access to higher education, only a certain group of people, like, let's say white people, have had access to these sort of spaces. When people try to hire, they just go with the people that they know. But if the only people you've ever known are white, then it does create an unfair place for, like, okay, if you're only hiring from people within your friend group, but everyone is white, then it becomes self-defeating for any person of color to go to school and to do all the things and to become excellent and to work hard. just to not get the job anyway. If someone doesn't get considered because their last name is a black last name or their first name is a black first name or whatever the case is, all that affirmative action was trying to do is just say, hey, let's just make it so that everyone gets an equal consideration. And they offered incentives and said, now, yes, were there bad examples of this? Absolutely. I'm not trying to even deny that. But
Yeah.
by and large, the largest benefactors of affirmative action and DEI were white women, just so we're clear. Anyway, what's frustrating is when somebody like Charlie Kirk, who should know better, honestly, says something like, if I see a black pilot, I'm going to be scared if the plane's going to go down. It's like, why would someone who could not fly a plane be flying your plane? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
When you say things like,
to what benefit or value does that add the organization who hired the pilot in the first place?
yes,
They want people flying in their planes. They want to make
yes,
profit. They're not
yes,
going to intentionally put a unqualified human being or right behind
right.
in the seat. Like they just
But
wouldn't do it. Like to what
yeah,
value, to what benefit does that have for them?
yes. But it's couched in a sort of, if you're not a person of color, you're like, oh, that's a genuine concern. But if you're a person of color, you're like, that's the sort of like passive aggressive pseudo racist nonsense that undermines us at every turn. Like,
It's
it's
disgusting.
so frustrating. Like,
Yeah, it's really
hey, are
frustrating.
you here because you're good at what you do or because they just needed a diversity hire? I'm like, I'm here because I'm qualified and I'm the best for the job. Why are you here? And I've actually told people that because I'm like, first of all, if you want to go point for point, stat for stat, let's go. I feel pretty confident, but I don't want to have to go there. And people who use rhetoric like that, they give a pass for other people who are, again, they don't know better, but they're just being told by this person they're a Christian and they're outspoken on their faith and all this kind of stuff. Charlie Kirk has said insane things about Muslims, basically painting every Muslim as like, these hyper jihadist, like super violent people. When I can't think of a single Muslim person. I know a lot of Muslim people. I can't think of a single Muslim person who is violent in my life. I can't think of anyone in the public square that I'm like, this person is actively a violent person. It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
Championing, he was one of the big proponents of when Trump lost the 2020 election and the big lie that like,
Mm-hmm.
the election was stolen when like literally I think it was like something like 60 different court cases where they had no evidence that there was any sort of wrongdoing. And Trump was laughed out of court by his own judges, like judges that were appointed by him or conservative judges. They were like, there is no muster to this case. He was a proponent of that. And so again,
conspiracy theories on voting machines, all sorts of stuff.
yes,
Yeah.
all those things. He said he's on record saying that questioning the mental capacities, the mental faculties of Black women who are hired into spaces because of his thoughts on DEI, which are disgusting. There's other things where
Making false claims about transgender people and mass shootings.
yes. Well, and just yes, and just like generally just the sort of rhetoric that like is unbecoming of somebody who is a follower of the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so again, we're not trying to take away that like, do I think he had a genuine faith? I actually do think he did have a genuine faith. I think a lot of the people that I've occupied spaces with have genuine faith. What's really hard is, as a person of color, to watch people gloss over the deeply problematic, deeply hurtful things that have led to policies that actually hurt my friends and my family. And then for all of the leaders in the evangelical space to be like, what a great Christian, what a martyr. But his thing wasn't Christianity. His thing was politics. And that's not a martyr. And he shouldn't have died. He shouldn't have been shot. Like, that's horrific. That's tragic. That's unjust. I'm glad they, it seems like they got the guy, and hopefully if anybody else is involved, they'll get more people. We champion that. But also, we can't gloss over the hurt that this person caused with their rhetoric, with their words, the sort of cover that he created for the tearing down of the dignity of other people, whether it was intentional or not. Those are things that have to be addressed. And as a church, it's incredibly hurtful and frustrating for people to just try to pretend now like all he did was just talk about Jesus and be a good family man. Like, that's not what happened. I've literally heard him arguing for that kids shouldn't receive school lunch in their public schools because their parents should be paying for it. Like, literally, he's on record saying that like There's no such thing as childhood starvation in this country, which is literally one of the most heinous things I've ever heard. There's other things that he said where he was talking about, like he was the sort of person that believed there should be no regulations around guns, which, just so we're clear for any of the Second Amendment people that are listening, the Second Amendment calls us to a well-regulated militia, meaning that within the Second Amendment, they are saying there should be good regulations. And so no one wants to take away guns, but like in the same way that a car, you have to have a license to drive a car because a car as a piece of machinery is dangerous, there should be regulations and training around these implements of war that are wreaking havoc in our society. So I say all to say that is what creates this really difficult, nuanced picture of like, anytime a father and a husband is shot and killed in cold blood in front of thousands of people, that's a tragedy. But we also cannot whitewash this person's legacy in the wake of their death.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And as we start to kind of land the plane here, we want to end on a hopeful note, and one that really leads us towards a way forward. But I realize like what happens in this space is so often we hear just how the mind works. We hear people say things that affirm our presuppositions and our beliefs. And there's a lot, millions of Christians in this country and billions around the world, whether you have a very committed, regular Christian faith, or you come up out of a Christian tradition, or you just have some sort of even Christian values, or you hear these spiritual things being said. You hear the words of scripture where you talk about your faith and you talk about God. That relates to a lot of people on so many levels. And it affirms the thing that you're connected to. So you feel already immediately connected to this other person because they worship God, or, they believe in God. And so I'm now inclined to want to hear from this person. And so we kind of then start to gloss over and forgive the other things that are said and just accept it for truth because they've started with the first thing. And that is, whether it's some sort of prayer to God or some sort of appeal to a common faith, that's a very common persuasive tactic to use in debate and, of course, in an argumentation. Mm-hmm. So Jesus did the same thing, though, but he did it from a different level. I've been finding, and I would just encourage maybe even our audience to go through the Sermon on the Mount, which you'll find in the New Testament, the first book in the New Testament, in Matthew, beginning in chapter 5. And it runs for the next 3 chapters. 5, 6, and 7. Yeah. And so it's this articulate sermon of Jesus of just a number of issues that he's talking about. But what he's doing is he's actually addressing the laws of the land, the religious laws, especially, and some of the political ones, but most of the religious laws of the time. He's not actually picking them apart. He's not kind of like, Ryan, you were starting to go down this road, and I'll just call you out just briefly for a second, if I could.
Sure.
But you're starting to talk about the Second Amendment and in articulating a more progressive viewpoint on that issue. I don't disagree with you on it. I'm just simply saying that others will immediately tune us out because of that. But my point is that Jesus wasn't even trying to engage at that level. He was simply trying to take us to another. And so I think that's what you were doing. I know that's what your intent was, is you were kind of showing another side to the same issue. And so and that's helpful. But
I don't mind being called out. I think it's good. I like getting into the nitty gritty. So this is great.
No, I know. And it's great. But it's, and so at the same time, though, this is what Jesus actually wanted us to do, is he wants us to look at, and as we're looking at scripture, and as you think about how we operate in faith, and as you talk about even discipleship, it's like, I don't even want to have this Second Amendment. Like, what? Second Amendment? What is that to God? Honestly, what is that to God? It's a right to carry a firearm, whatever. Let's have backpack, never mind. I'm not going to go there. But what does that even mean to God? He says, love your enemies, love your neighbor, follow me. Yeah. And at some point you start to realize, what are any of these things that we argue about? They're meaningless before him. I don't need this tool. I don't need this thing to feel like I need the laws of the land, because there, at some point, when you are choosing the way of love and you're choosing the way of true justice, not by the law, but by the Spirit, the way of love, you're automatically going to realize this is foolishness. Why are we having this argument? Why are we having this conversation? And that's the narrow way. And we find ourselves so often getting caught up in those things. And unfortunately, a lot of people follow into, we hear God, and then we start hearing some articulate argument that maybe aligns with some of our values or some of the things that we're interested in. And we just take it as gospel. And Yet when we actually get into the words, we realize, you know what, actually, maybe we don't have this right. Maybe there's actually a better way. There's a higher calling, and it's far more self-sacrificial.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and to be fair, like, to me, I love that you called me out, because again, this is a sort of friendship that we have. I think people need to see it, because it's like, oh, I'm not threatened by that. I'm like, honestly, what I'm gonna say is, I think the specificity of my argument was to say that, like, this person has a nuanced, complex history, and there's harm that's caused by propagating certain arguments, like we are literally seeing in our country. But good, call it out, because, like, yeah, we'll be continuing to do that. I think that's exactly the hope of what we're trying to build here. You and I can disagree even on how we do this podcast and still love each other, still champion each other. You can disagree with your next door neighbor on their politics. You can disagree with your family. I disagree vehemently with my family on politics. And also, I'm gonna go fishing with my daddy later. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I'm gonna do. I love that man. And again, what we want to call people to is, I think, ministry leaders, hey, please lead from a space of loving your neighbor. Please, if you're in these spaces, let's not whitewash someone's legacy. We're not celebrating his death. We lament, we mourn his death. His death was tragic, and also, like, this person really created a lot of hurt for non-in-group people, and it's important to recognize that. Let's strive towards upholding the dignity of people, even if we don't agree with their life choices. Let's uphold their dignity. Let's not ostracize them. Let's not make straw man arguments. Let's not increase the rhetoric around, like, anyway, all to say, like, this is what we're trying to do. And also, like, we're going to talk a lot more about the marriage between politics and faith, and specifically the evangelical church and faith and politics, rather. And our hope is that there would be a more loving, a more just, a more dignified way of engaging with difficult topics, because again, the reason why we're talking about it is because it affects people's real lives. It's not to be controversial. It's just to say this, if we're really going to be real about, like, addressing people where they're at, we got to get into the nitty gritty of some of this stuff. And it doesn't mean that we don't love each other. It just means that we have to dig deeper into the heart of Jesus so that we don't lose each other in the process.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Maybe I'll conclude us on this thought, and it'll end where we kind of began. And I had a illustration of this busy intersection of culture and Christianity, culture and faith. Yeah. And there's been a massive collision that just occurred. It's gruesome. It's awful. There are tears. There's anger. People are out of their cars. They're on the side of the street. They're screaming and yelling at each other. Who are you going to be? I want to be the one who's going to walk in. I want to be the helpers, Mr. Rogers said. Look for the helpers. Let's walk in. We don't need to say much. We're going to hold those who are in tears and in pain. We're going to listen to them. We're going to offer our love and our compassion to them. And we're going to help clean up the mess. And we're going to get things functioning again. And you know what? It's scary and dangerous, because there are people yelling and screaming and throwing rocks at each other right now. And you're kind of walking in the middle of a pretty messy intersection. But we are not called to disengage. We're not called to apathy. And we're not called to scream, but we're called to serve.
Yeah.
That's what it means to be a hopeful exile.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah, I agree. Amen.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.